Hello and welcome to Series 7, Episode 5 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Leslie Cara and my co-host today is Lauren North. On our last full episode, Nikki Smith and I talked to the delightful Rachel Block about writing close to home and her most recent novel, The Fall, which is out now in paperback. So if you haven't listened to that one, do catch up with that. That was really interesting. Rachel was a charming guest to have on, and Nikki was a brilliant co-presenter. Obviously all the presenters on here, apart from me, are brilliant.
Oh, no, don't say that. It was brilliant. I absolutely loved listening to the podcast as I was editing it. So it was a really good one.
Yes, it's quite nice, isn't it, listening to one that you're not in. I've found that when I've listened to you and Nikki before, it's sort of, it feels familiar and yet not. It's great. Yeah, no, I loved it. But today I'm babbling. Everybody, I'm babbling a little bit today because I'm feeling a little bit wiped out because I had my COVID and flu jab yesterday. So if I'm sort of rather strange today, or stranger than normal, then that's my excuse.
I have no excuse, so bear with me.
Today, we've got award-winning crime and thriller author Sharon Bolton coming on, and we're going to talk to her about her most recent novel, The Dark, and her writing career. And our topic for today is what's in a name? And we'll be talking about what we mean by that in a little while. But first, how was your week off, Lauren? It seems such a long while ago. I expect it must seem like a distant memory now.
Yes, it does. Well, it was just half term, so we were just a bit busy. We had 2 weeks off with the kids. And we've just been busy doing like trips to London and things. So it's been nice, but it's just such a juggling act, I find, trying to work and feel like I'm giving the children enough attention as well. So it's finding that balance is hard on all of us. I was very relieved yesterday when they both went back to school.
Oh, yes.
They weren't as relieved as me, unfortunately. So yeah, this month's a busy one. I've got about 10,000 words left on the book I'm currently writing, and I'm due structural edit email any second from a thriller I've got coming out next year. So yeah, it's busy, but hoping to juggle it all. What about you? What have you been doing, and what have you got coming up?
Well, I'm about to go into a period of hibernation, although I'll be working hard. So I'm not exactly staying off social media, but I'm kind of, taking a back seat on that. Just pop on every now and then and see what's going on. And
are you turning notifications off on your phone?
On my phone, yes. But every so often I'm going to go on Twitter and Instagram and have a look, and I like replying to comments because when readers get in touch, I don't like to ignore them or anything, so I will certainly be popping on from time to time, but not doing my normal, tweets and things, or just a few, depending on how well the writing's going, I suppose. But yeah, COVID jabs yesterday, so feeling a bit wiped out. And I've had my son and his wife and our grandson Milo to stay, and they've been with us for about 5 days. They went yesterday. It was lovely to see them, but it's very tiring, a little baby. Even one as gorgeous and lovely as Milo that I can't wait to get my hands on all the time. And my back's aching from picking him up.
I know. Oh.
But he's just so gorgeous. So
I saw a photo on Twitter you posted. He is so gorgeous.
Oh, he really is lovely. And he met his great grandparents for the first time. So that was nice. Yeah. So, writing, really just planning and writing and trying to get things organised for sort of Christmas and what we're all going to do, because I wanted to get all that admin-y stuff out of the way before I moved into your cave. November. And I'm not doing NaNoWriMo, but I don't know if you are. Are you doing
No, I'm not, because I've only got a bit left on this book and I've got structured edits. And also it was really hard last year, and I loved elements of it. I loved the solidarity and the community. But it was the weekends doing 2,000 words on a Saturday and on a Sunday. It was just too much, I think. I work hard enough, frankly.
Absolutely.
So but what have you got left on your book to write? Because you're not starting from scratch, are you?
No, I'm not doing NaNoWriMo, but I'm using the sort of discipline of it, to write every day. I couldn't even tell you how much I've got left, because I'm just going through it all and jigging about things I've done and adding new scenes and things. But I don't say when I hope to have it finished, but I know that I need to focus.
Yeah, I think just having
as much done in November as I can.
Yeah, I think just having that focus, that mindset really helps, doesn't it?
Definitely. So I haven't arranged any sort of social occasions or anything for November. I really, really just want to be at home and writing.
Yeah. And also you'll be well for December and all the Christmas events then as well, won't you? I
hope so.
I'll probably have COVID for the Christmas party that I'm organising.
Don't say that. But our topic for today, as I said earlier, is what's in a name.
Yes.
And we mean really authors' names. A lot of authors seem to change their names, don't they? Or write under different names, pen names. I mean, in the olden days, it used to be women sort of writing under male names, because they wanted to, get sort of recognition as writers. In the Victorian times, I think people like George Eliot and things like that. Nowadays, people change their names for a variety of reasons, don't they? I mean, you started as well, you're still writing as Laurie Ellingham, aren't you?
Yes, sporadically, but yes. So
now you write as Lauren North. So how did that come about, Lauren?
That was quite the usual genre change. So I was writing women's fiction and romance as a Laurie Ellingham, and then I wrote some psychological suspense, and it was just felt that because I hadn't built up a big enough track record and readership under Laurie Ellingham, there was no reason to think about transferring readers. So because it was a new genre, it was a new name, which works out really well because I've still got my old name to write under as well, so I don't have to be thinking about brand continuity, if you like, in that sense, and which is quite common. Like Louise Jensen is a very good thriller writer, and she writes women's fiction under Amelia Henley, which is her pen name. So I think it's becoming more common, I think, to have the two names side by side, I think. But it's not the only reason people change names, though, is it? Because you do get the older freshen up.
Yes, I think some if particularly if sales haven't gone very well, people, maybe some retailers are sort of loath to take books on. Often publishers or authors sort of think about maybe changing a name just sort of to give it that debut feel again.
Yeah, and that certainly worked for Alex North, didn't it? He was quite a successful crime writer under another name, under his real name, and he has now reinvented himself as Alex North, and his books are doing brilliantly, aren't they?
Yes, it creates a sort of buzz about a book.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes, if you've been in the industry a long time, but I mean, we can't do it with every book, though, can we?
No. Can you imagine having to handle sort of Twitter accounts for different names? And it would be a complete nightmare.
I know. Well, I've got LC North now, so I've got 3 names, and I was like, do I need a new Twitter account? Thinking, please say no. And they were like, yeah, no, you're fine with Lauren North. Thank goodness, I just can't. Like, even with my 2 that I've got, if you want to know anything about what's going on in my life, that's the Laura North one. Laurie Ellingham just tweets about her book. She's a real selfish cow, because I can't be bothered. Like, I feel like I'm lying if I'm like, oh, this is my dog. No, this is my dog. So I think it is hard. I have massive respect for people who juggle lots and lots on social media, but I certainly couldn't. So there's
also writers who have a sort of pen name and never sort of make public appearances. I remember all the Elena Ferrante. Nobody knew for ages who she was, did they? And that's another interesting way of sort of writing a book, isn't it? As a sort of secret author identity.
Yes, I sometimes talk about doing that with my husband, being like, we'll do it. We'll be a male writer, because I would love to know, like, if there is a difference between how female writers and male writers are treated in the industry, like with just things like salary and things like that. So if I could fake it as a man, would it be different? Like, I don't know, I'm just curious.
That's the question of the year, isn't it? Can Lauren North fake it as a man?
I was talking to my friend the other day, and I won't name them, but they were talking about how they have to start charging people for certain things they're doing. And I said, she felt a bit awkward about it. I was like, what you need is a fake assistant. You need a male fake assistant who doesn't need to be friendly in emails or anything. He's just be like, this is the payment. Okay. And I quite like the idea of having a male assistant. I can't work out what he'd do other than just reply me, which I don't really need. So
He'd make all your difficult decisions for you, wouldn't he?
Yes, he could
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
lovely.
So, yes, so I think we better get our guest on, don't you think? All
Yes,
this
let's
chat
do
about
that. I'm so
names.
excited to ask her these questions.
And so today we are going to welcome the fabulous, best-selling Sharon Bolton.
Hello, Sharon, and welcome to In Suspense. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into our questions, I'm going to read your bio so all of our listeners know everything there is to know about you. So Sharon, formerly S.J. Bolton, grew up in a cotton mill town in Lancashire and had an eclectic early career in marketing and public relations. She gave it up in 2000 to become a mother and a writer. Her first novel, Sacrifice, was voted Best New Read by Amazon UK, whilst her second, Awakening, won the 2010 Mary Higgins Clark Award, part of the prestigious Edgars in the US. She has been shortlisted for the CWA Gold Dagger, the Theakston's Prize for Best Thriller, the International Thriller Writers' Best First Novel Award, and the Prix du Polar in France, and the Martin Becker Award in Sweden. Her latest novel, The Dark, came out this summer, and it is very dark and creepy and packed full of twists. I found myself desperate to read it and also wanting to cover my eyes at the same time, which doesn't work as well as when you're watching a horror film when you're trying to read a book. So it was brilliant. Could you start, Sharon, by telling us a bit about The Dark, please?
Okay, so young single men all over the Western world are angry. They're lonely, they're embittered, because they're unable to make any sort of meaningful connection with the opposite sex. And they have their sights on revenge. So they believe that female companionship, love, and sex is their birthright. Now, these guys, they're smart, they're educated, they've got fairly formidable computer skills, and they've reached breaking point. So through a sophisticated campaign of intimidation, fear, and violence, they plan to take back what they believe is rightfully theirs. Does that describe The Dark, do you think?
Whoa, yes.
A lot, yeah.
Yes, you read that out in a very scary voice, Sharon. Really set the tone.
My normal voice.
No, I mean, it is. I mean, I knew just from reading the prologue that this was going to be one hell of a dark and twisty ride. You know, it was very, very shocking. Where did the idea come from? I mean, particularly that inciting event that you didn't mention just now, and it's no spoiler because it happens right at the beginning, where a baby is snatched from a pram and tossed into the River Thames. I mean, where did that idea come from?
Okay, so I often say books for me have a fairly long gestation period. They can be buzzing around in my head for years. And it takes more than one idea to make a book. For me, it takes three. One idea is a short story. And so I heard about the incel movement. Incel stands for involuntary celibate. These are the men who are at the heart of the book, the ones who are organizing a terrorist campaign against women. So I read about incels several years ago and thought, oh, this is interesting and scary, and definitely something I could turn into a book at some stage. But it wasn't a story, it was just the background to the story. So I had the background. I thought, I need the story. So I was, I had incels in the back of my head for quite a long time. I was also conscious that a lot of readers were very anxious to see Lacey Flint back again, because I hadn't written a Lacey book for several years. She is easily my most popular character ever. And just about every week I get an email from a reader saying, when's she coming back? When's she coming back? And I was used to say, it has to be when the story is right for Lacey. And a lot of the stories I was writing just weren't. So that was it. I needed to bring Lacey back. And then, do you know what? I think I had a dream one night about a baby just being snatched from its pram, put into a pool inflatable, and then just set adrift on a major urban river. And I thought, that is such a striking way to open a book. And that's when it all came together. I thought I can make this work as the opening to the book about incels. And because the river I know best is the River Thames. So it obviously had to be the River Thames. So it's a London-based book. Well, of course it's Lacey. So then I started to see how Lacey could be on hand because she lives on the river. She'd been in a little kayak one morning and she'd be the ideally placed to rescue this baby, which is the opening salvo, if you like, in the incels campaign of fear and intimidation against women. So it was all those ideas just coming together. That's how it started.
That's so fascinating. And you've mentioned incels, and it is really quite scary to think that these groups actually exist on the dark web. And I wondered what research you did to sort of really get to grips with what they're capable of.
Well, the first thing to say is they're not nearly as well organised in real life as they are in my book. And very grateful. So we've yet to see, and hopefully we never will, anything like what happens in the dark. But there have been incel groups who have carried out some very unpleasant terrorist attacks. They've carried out bomb attacks. They've carried out mass shootings. There was even a case in the UK a couple of years ago. I can't remember the details now. But if you Google incel, then a whole host of material comes up. Newspaper articles that have been written about them, periodic journals. So that's always my starting point for research. Google it and see what there is. And quite often that will lead you into other directions. So there is a very, very good book. And I'm a little bit embarrassed that I can't off the top of my head remember the author. It might be Laura Bates. It's called Men Who Hate Women. So this appeared fairly quickly after I started my research. So I ordered this book, read this book. It is just brilliant. And so dark and scary and all sorts of things that, I had no idea about. But it does have a chapter on incels, which I found very useful. So the Google research will lead to sort of books that I can read. Quite often there are documentaries, YouTube videos. There's a lot of stuff out there. It's just a question of being patient and combing your way through it. But I find the research a really important part of the writing process, because all the time I'm researching, I'm starting to plan the novel. I'm starting to have ideas for chapters, for characters, even for scenes. So by the time I get to the end of it, the novel is definitely starting to take shape.
So I'm just going to ask a follow-up about research. Sorry, Leslie.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
You just talked about how you do it. So did you do it before you start writing? Is it part of your planning? How much time do you think you spend researching before you get to writing?
It can be a couple of months.
Okay.
It won't be solid research because it's usually happening while I'm doing edits on the previous book and sometimes promotion for the current book. But it can be 2 to 3 months just reading around the subject. And as I read, I get ideas for sort of other areas I can go and have a look at. So it also sort of grow and develop and become quite a major project. But I've never believed that you have to write what you know. I think that's the worst piece of advice ever given to writers. My characters have been police officers, obstetricians, psychiatrists, vicars. I am none of those things. I have to do a lot of work to learn about how these characters operate. But that's just part of the process for me.
That reminds me, actually, because I saw you came to a town where I used to live, Frinton, and did an event there once, many years ago. And I think it was was it Little Black Lies, when that first came out, which was set in the Falklands, wasn't it?
Yes.
And I remember thinking, oh, she must have been to the Falklands and spent time there and studied it, because it really was so authentic, and it really sort of, I was so impressed with the world building and how that sort of worked in the novel. And I was so surprised when someone asked you about that and you said, no, I didn't go, I've never been, I just looked it up online. So
I did a bit more than that. I did a bit.
well, I'm sure you did, yes.
I have
But you
never
hadn't
been
actually
to
visited
Ireland.
there was amazing. Yeah.
I've never been to South Georgia, which is where my novel The Split is set. I very much want to go one day.
Yeah.
But no, I don't subscribe to the view that you have to visit your book locations.
No.
If you do your research properly, if you have a strong imagination, then you can create that sense of place. And I always say, nobody is going to tell me that the picture I paint of the Falkland Islands in Little Black Lies is wrong, because everybody who goes there will have a different reaction to it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All they can say is how I portray it isn't how they saw it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. But back to the dark, it's a very, very scary storyline, as we've said. And although you said, in real life they're not as well organised as in the dark, thank goodness, in a sense it's even more chilling, because it does seem vaguely possible in this sort of world of fake news and the horrible misogyny and online hatred that exists. And you've talked about all the different forms of research that you carried out. I mean, how disturbing was it for you personally to delve into this world? Does researching those sorts of things have an adverse effect on you, or can you keep a distance from it?
No, it does have an impact upon me. But just a couple of examples of the research for the dark and how it had, I did find it quite disturbing. At one point in the story, the incels are demanding an immediate and urgent act of parliament that would effectively take away the rights of women, largely. So women would lose the vote. They would lose the right to own property. They would lose the right to seek a divorce. So there is this incel charter, if you like, which is being put before Parliament. And some members of Parliament are saying, you know what, we should think about this just to calm things down for a bit. So there are two reactions in the story to this incel charter. The first is that it's completely ridiculous. It's absurd. And the second is, well, hang on. There are countries in the world where women are in exactly this position. And that sort of reflects the realization that I had as I was writing it. On the surface, it did seem absurd that women could possibly lose the franchise in a Western democracy. But on the other hand, there are many countries in the world where women don't even have the right to leave their house without their husband's permission.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the themes that I look at in the dark are very realistic. The other thing that I found particularly chilling is there is one point in the book where they are discussing the threat and what would happen if it came to an all-out war between men and women. And one of the characters says, well, men would win. They always do. And of course they would. They absolutely would. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster. They have far more of the aggressive hormones that turn people turn people hostile. So, of course, if it came to that, and it made me realize that ultimately women are only safe because of the kindness of men.
Yes.
Once that kindness is taken away.
And that's a terrifying thought, isn't it?
It's very scary. Thanks. I'm going to have nightmares tonight.
But that's something that women have to live with all the time. And I think in the Western countries, in Western democracies, we forget it because we've taken that kindness, that fairness for granted for so long. But there are millions of women around the world who cannot do that.
Yes, and with the growing sort of far right movement in parts of Europe and things, that it does sort of bring it home to you how fragile our freedom is, really. But yeah,
absolutely, yeah, a very scary thought. Moving on to a slightly lighter question now. So you've mentioned already that one of the main characters in the novel is the much loved Lacey Flint, and I believe that this is your 5th Lacey Flint novel. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good. Okay. I'm like scrolling through Amazon
plus
trying to work out how many.
And a couple of short stories, but yes.
And with the last one coming out in 2014, I wondered what it was that made you take a break from Lacey and how it felt to write her again.
Okay, so I felt at the time that I'd probably taken Lacey as far as I could go. Um, Her backstory was becoming put to the point of being unwieldy. And for those who have never read a Lacey Flint book, she has a very, very complicated history. Basically, she isn't Lacey Flint. She's stolen a dead woman's identity. She's living a lie, even though she is a police officer. So her job is to hunt out dark secrets in other people while she's guarding one of her own. And if that ever comes to light, her whole world will implode. Plus, she has a very close relative who's serving time for mass murder in Durham. So it's a very, very complex backstory. And it was getting increasingly difficult to juggle that between the demands of regular readers who knew that story inside out and who didn't need to be reminded every time, and new readers who would be totally lost if I didn't give some explanation of where she came from. So I think I just got up to the point of, can't do this anymore. And also I had other stories. I wanted to write Little Black Lies, which could not be a Lacey book. I wanted to write other books as well. So I just put Lacey on hold. But then I've already explained why The Dark had to be a Lacey book. It's a London-based book. It was ideal for her. So bringing her back was, not without its challenges, because, I mean, the first decision I had to make was, do I move time on for Lacey and her friends the way time has moved on in a real sense? So do I allow for the passage of 6 or 7 years, so she'd be quite a lot older? And I thought, or do I pick up where I left off? Now, I decided picking up where I left off was going to be much easier, because otherwise there'd be too many questions the reader had, what happened to them in these 6 or 7 years. So I went back to the time that I'd left them. But then there are challenges in that, because time has moved on, technology has moved on massively. So suddenly, I mean, just to take a silly example, the mobile telephones they were using in the last Lacey Flint book are worlds apart from the ones they're using now. So those challenges have to be managed. And so yes, it had challenges going back to her, but it was like revisiting old friends, and it was nice to sort of move them on. So Mark Josbury is now doing a desk job. He used to be the sort of very macho, brave undercover cop. He's been pulled out of that world now and put behind a desk at New Scotland Yard. And he doesn't like it. He thinks he's rubbish at it. So he's kind of unhappy in his job. Dana Tulloch is a mum now. She's got a 6-month-old baby. So suddenly she's terrified of everything, because her whole world now revolves around the baby. So it was interesting to give the characters those new challenges and see how they worked with them.
I bet, yeah. And did you have to reread some of the Lacey Flint books?
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, you did. I wasn't sure how well you'd remember it. I mean, I can barely remember the character names that I've got in previous books, so I imagine so.
No, definitely had to reread. Yeah.
Now, in this novel, Sharon, Lacey's working in the Metropolitan Police Marine Unit, isn't she? Which I found really fascinating.
Yeah, I do as well.
And I was wondering, although based on your previous answer, I'm wondering what answer you're going to give to this. Have you ever been out on the river with officers in the Marine Unit to sort of see what the job entails? Okay,
not with the Marine Unit. A few years ago, before I started writing, I worked for the National Rivers Authority. The Thames region. So the job of that organisation was to manage the River Thames and all its various tributaries. So I have been on the River Thames a lot, right? And I do know a lot about the workings of the River Thames. So I've long been fascinated by it. I love the River Thames. So whilst I haven't been out with the Marine Unit, I do know the river. And I do know the Marine Unit because I had a friend who used to help me write the book, the police procedural books. He was a former detective with the Metropolitan Police, and he introduced me to the then superintendent of the Marine Unit, a gentleman called Derek Caterer, who was so very helpful. So I went to visit him a few times. He walked me around the police station at Wapping, took me down onto the pontoon and showed me where they put the bodies when they pull them out of the river. And he was always really, really helpful in sort of making sure that the marine aspect of it was accurate. So I had a police consultant that I worked with quite closely, which was really helpful.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant.
It does, yes.
Interestingly, there's a funny story. There's one of my short stories about Lacey involves a potential terrorist attack on the London Eye, where the terrorists bring the bomb up the river and plant it on the London Eye, and they make it sort of collapse into the water. Wow. And when Derek read this for the first time, he said, "I've been saying they'll do this for ages. I've been telling them they'll do."
Oh God, when I've been on the London Eye 3 times, I don't think I'll ever go on it again, but every time I've been on it, I've always thought that, because I've, been having the catastrophic mind of a crime writer. So yeah.
Scary thought, isn't it?
Oh dear.
Now, our topic for today is what's in a name. We are talking about the reasons people change their names and sort of the pros and cons for it. So you originally wrote as S.J. Bolton and then moved to Sharon Bolton. So we wondered if you could talk us through the name change and why you sort of originally decided on initials and then went to Sharon. Please.
Okay, so both times it was a publisher decision, not mine.
Yes.
So Sacrifice got a publisher, Transworld Publishers, in 2006, I think. And they said to me, "We love this book and we think it will appeal to men. We think men will read your book as well as women. But in this country, men aren't very keen to buy a book with a woman's name on the cover. So would you consider writing under your initials in the way of P.D. James or J.K. Rowling?" Now, I was so desperate to be published, I'd have agreed to anything. So I said, yes, of course, even though I didn't have a middle name. So I had to invent a middle name. So that was the reason why in the UK, I published initially as S.J. Bolton. Interestingly, in other European countries like Germany, they like nothing better than a really nasty, dark book written by a woman. So in Germany, I was always Sharon Bolton, and quite a lot of European countries as well. So there I was, sort of this rather sort of anonymous, androgynous crime writer, if you like. But then sort of times changed and social media took off in a way we couldn't really have predicted in 2006. So I had a website, I had a Twitter account, I was on Facebook, I was even blogging. It was blindingly obvious I was a woman. Yes. So when I think my 5th book came out and my publishers wanted to give me a big sort of push to sort of relaunch me onto the market, if you like, they said, "Well, why don't you come out as a woman and we'll build a bit of a media story around it. And we'll see if we can give you that extra push." So again, their decision to publish as Sharon Bolton for my 5th book. And it worked quite well. It sort of boosted me up the charts and got quite a bit of attention. So yeah, that's the reasoning behind it.
And what's your opinion on name changing? Because it seems to happen quite a lot these days, doesn't it? A lot of authors change their names. We were talking earlier about sort of it's becoming more common, possibly because book space in retailers is shrinking, and if an author's previous sales haven't been brilliant, it's a sort of way of sort of giving them that sort of debut feel. But what's your take on that? Do you think it's something authors should be wary of, or is it a good idea, do you think?
I think it can work, but it doesn't necessarily. So it is a big risk. I know Steve. Do you know Steve Mosby? He's a crime writer.
I've heard of him. Yes.
He changed his name the last few years ago to Alex North. Yes. And that really did work well for him.
Yeah, in fact, I mentioned him in the introduction.
Lauren did mention him earlier. Yeah.
Writing hasn't changed. I mean, Steve Mosby is a brilliant crime writer. His books were always brilliant and very dark. And I'm sure Alex North's books are equally brilliant and dark. But that new name, interestingly, a sort of a slightly sexless name as well, could be a man, could be a woman.
Yeah,
somehow worked for him.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yes, that androgynous sort of type of name.
Yeah, you do need the publisher's backing, don't you? Like, they've really got to invest, haven't they?
Yes.
Otherwise, it's all just a waste of time, I guess.
They absolutely have to. And I think for every success, Steve Mosby, Alex North's success story, there will be others that didn't quite work, that were a little disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. Probably 10 others that didn't work for every one that does. Yeah.
So I think it's to be treated cautiously, but it does reflect a change in the market from when I started publishing back in 2008. Debuts were not so important back then. They didn't get the same attention that they do now. Now, a lot of the media attention in particular is on the big debuts.
Yes.
So I suppose, a name change can give a publisher a chance to present an author as a new voice.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to talk about your career now, Sharon, if that's okay. As you mentioned, you started your career in 2008, which makes Leslie and I feel rather like newbies still, with Sacrifice, which Sophie Hannah called one of the best thrillers ever. And there isn't much better praise than that, is there, from the wonderful Sophie Hannah. So can you share with us how, if at all, you think the industry has changed in the time that you've been publishing books?
Gosh, I think we've seen trends come and go. So while I was writing my first 2 or 3 books, the books that were doing very, very well and getting a lot of attention were the really quite violent books with a lot of on-page physical violence, even sort of torture. So that was a trend which I flirted with in Now You See Me, because that is that's quite a violent book. But so we sort of saw that come and go. We've seen other interesting trends, but that's not really a change, is it? That's just the way the market fluctuates. I think one big difference has been the rise of the self-published community, or
Yes,
independent publishers. I mean, some of whom are extremely good, and some of whom go on to get publishing contracts and do very well in the traditional marketplace. But the impact that has had, I think, is that suddenly there's a lot more competition for space. Not physical space, because the independent community tend to be mainly online. But for online space. So suddenly there are many, many more titles available on Amazon than there were back in 2008.
Yeah.
And I can't give you the percentage, but a good chunk of them will be independently published. So there's a lot of competition for space. It's also had an impact upon pricing, because that community are coming in at quite a low price point, putting pressure on the traditional market to lower their prices as well. Amazon has grown in importance, and again, Amazon is a very price conscious organization. So we've seen a lot of sort of downward pressure upon book pricing. Yeah, which is a good thing for the consumer. I'm not going to argue against that, but it does put pressure upon publishers and author earnings. Without, there are an awful lot of authors who do not earn a living wage.
Yeah, and frustrating that we're seeing the cost of living go up so much in everything we purchase, and yet book prices are still going down. I'm seeing more and more books that are less than 99p now. Doesn't seem to be any thought like, oh well, we should price it at £1.99, because everything's gone up by £1 at least. So why are we not selling our ebooks for that? It's a challenging place for us.
A lot of us do find that quite difficult, to be honest.
Yes, the effort that goes into writing a book, to see it sold for 99p or less is quite galling. I mean, it's nice to have an offer, a promotion or something. That's always good. But if so many books are being sold at that price, that is all. Yes,
there are readers who will never pay more than 99p for a book.
Very true.
And you can't blame them if great books are available for 99p. You can't, but it is putting a lot of pressure upon authors who have to make a living, or they'll stop writing books.
Yeah. And have you got any tips for creating career longevity? And I'm asking for myself.
Gosh, get on with your publishers. That sounds obvious, but I sometimes, as I'm sort of looking sort of ambling through Twitter, and I see authors publicly criticizing their publishers, I think, what planet are you guys on? Stop it.
I agree.
I always
Why would
think
you do that?
and in those situations you're always like, where are your friends not telling you to stop now?
Yeah, some of them are really, they make you cringe.
So understand where your publishers are coming from, understand that they are a business, that they are in it to make money, and that their job is to sell the book. My job is to write it, their job is to sell it, and when it comes to selling the book, they are the experts. So I don't get arsy with them about things like covers or titles. If they really believe a particular cover or a particular title is right, then that's their job. So it is important to develop good, lasting relationships with your publisher, and just don't ever be complacent. Keep pushing to write the best book that you can. I always tell myself, imagine this is the last book I'll ever write. It has to be the very, very best that I can do. And it can't leave my desk until it is as good as I can make it. And I do that with every book. I don't necessarily achieve it with every book, but that's what I try to do.
Right. Yeah.
So never get complacent about the skill, and work hard with the promotion to the extent that you can. Be on Twitter, keep your website up to date, do the events that your publicist sends you to, engage with readers, because that all helps. But strike a balance. Your job is to write the book.
That's good advice, and I think the focus should always be on writing the book and writing the best book you can, as you've said, and because we've got to improve, and as you say, each book, if it's not better than the last, then why are we doing it? We don't want to just keep on churning out the same sort of thing. Not that we can churn anything out because it's hard work, but you know what I mean. We want to sort of develop our craft, don't we?
I think
interestingly, I was talked into doing a writing course with my friend Belinda Bauer a few weeks ago, a week-long course in rural North Wales. We were teaching aspiring crime writers how to sort of better hone their plot. And I've always said, I cannot teach creative writing. Why would I? I'm not a teacher. But anyway, she bullied me into it. And I was amazed how much I learned just going over the basics of, the classic story arc, the 3-act structure, the 6 great moments, things that I'd kind of forgotten. I knew, but I'd forgotten. And then I suddenly, when I was sort of impressing upon these people in the course, the importance of the 6 great moments and the 3-act structure, I thought, well, I kind of lost sight of some of that in my own writing. So I came away from that course with lots of new good habits that I should never have learned. So even though you're established, don't think there's nothing you can learn. Go and do a writing course. You'll be surprised what you've forgotten.
I always say that about mentoring, that I when I'm doing mentoring for other authors, I find that I'm telling them to do things and then I come away and think I need to do that as well. Like I know it, and like you say, you forget these things. It's really important. That's such great advice. Thank you, Sharon.
That's really, really good advice. And Sharon, you have a knack in your writing of putting your readers on edge right from the very start of each of your novels. And I was wondering whether that is a technique that you consciously plan to include, or whether that sort of evolves organically as you're writing and as you're editing. Well, it's a sort of difficult question to answer, but do you know what I mean by that?
Well, I do think the opening of a book is incredibly important. I always say Dick Francis, the
horse race,
the absolute master of the opening line, right? Pick up any Dick Francis book and read the opening line. It will be superb. John Grisham is the master of the opening chapter, right? And so I really admire writers who can grab the reader from the very beginning. So I'm always trying to do that. Now, whether I achieve it is a different matter. I don't necessarily know immediately how to create a great opening. It's good if I can have that idea from the outset, but you can always go back and put in a great opening when you finish when you've drafted the story.
And some of your earlier novels have a hint of the supernatural threaded through them, don't they? And I know you have a love of the Gothic, don't you? Is that something you'd like to return to in future novels? Or
well, I absolutely, yes. The Craftsman, which I wrote a few years ago, is very much has a very strong supernatural thread running through it. But I always, the point about Gothic is that it could be supernatural, but isn't necessarily.
Yes.
It appears that way, but there is a perfectly natural explanation if you look for it. So that is the case with all my books that sort of delve into that sort of area. So The Craftsman, whilst it's about witches and witchcraft, you can always read it on another level. There is nothing supernatural going on here at all. It's just people, that's what people are thinking. So I very much enjoy writing that sort of book. So the sequel to The Craftsman is coming out in a couple of weeks. So that's The Buried.
The Buried, okay.
Buried, and that is a Florence Lovelady book. And yeah, I really I like The Buried. I'm very, very proud of it. So
that's a great title.
I'm excited for it to come out.
Are there any other genres you'd like to write in, or are you?
You know what? I would absolutely love to write real supernatural ghost stories, verging on the horror. And my publishers have an imprint called Galance, which does the sort of supernatural. And I make a complete fool of myself at Orion's Christmas parties because I'm always, where are the Galance people? I want to go and talk to them. I want to pitch this ghost story idea. No, I can't. I don't know. I'm under contract to a different imprint, and I can only really do a book a year. But I have.
Well, Sharon, you'll have to change your name to something ghostly, and then you can write in a different genre.
That would be brilliant, but I think I would struggle to write more than a book a year.
Amazing. Well, we're almost at the end of our show now, and I have one final question which we always like to ask all of our guests, which is, what have you been reading lately? Have you got anything you'd like to recommend?
Oh gosh. I wish I'd been prepared for this question, because the truth is a little bit embarrassing. But I'm totally addicted to the Wheel of Time series. Do you know Robert Jordan? They were dramatized, I think, early this year. So I watched the Prime adaptation. I think it was Prime. Thought, I like this, and sort of started reading the books, and there's about 16 of them.
But wow, you love it when you find a series.
A world built by this author that I can't absorb it all in one reading. So I'm going back. I'm reading them all for the second time now. So that's what I'm reading at the moment. But I do have Kate Atkinson's latest book on in hardback. Now, what's that called? Shrines of Gaiety?
Shrines of Gaiety, yes.
She is one of my all-time favourite writers. So I always get very excited when she has a book out. And I have Robert Galbraith's latest, The Ink Black Heart, waiting to be read. Again, quite a fan of Robert Galbraith. And there's something I read with my book club recently. Can't remember. It might come back to me.
Well, never mind, you've given us 3. That's fantastic.
Yes. What about you, Leslie? What have you been reading?
Well, because I'm moving into my hibernation writing sort of month, I'm not reading any fiction at the moment, but I'm reading a biography of Agatha Christie, Lucy Worsley's. And I'm really enjoying it, actually. I haven't read non-fiction and biographies for a while, and I'm really enjoying the sort of different type of reading, and it's fascinating. I like her style of writing, and I like her on the telly as well, Lucy Worsley. Yes. She's very good. So that's what I'm reading. What about you, Lauren?
So I've just read The Club by Ellery Lloyd, which was absolutely brilliant. They are a writing couple, and they are the next guest that we're having on. So I'm really excited to talk to them about their celebrity book. And I've just started reading Her by Mira Shah, which is absolutely brilliant. So a really great thriller. So yes, they're my current 2 books. I'm reading really slowly at the moment because I'm not carving out enough time really for reading. I feel a bit bad, but
well, you're doing so much writing. That's yes, what
that is the issue, I think.
Can't be Superwoman, can you?
Well, I try.
You try, yes. Well, sadly, I think that's all we've got time for today. But it's been absolutely fascinating having you on, Sharon. We've really enjoyed talking to you.
I very much enjoyed talking to the two of you. Thank you.
And thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And our listeners need to know that The Dark is out now. It's out in paperback now, isn't it? And it's very creepy and it's very gripping. And Absolutely. You need to read it. Very shocking.
I wholeheartly agree with that. Next week, in our next minisode on policing, we are chatting to Graham Bartlett about police lingo and acronyms. So that's one to look for next week. And as I said, our next interview guest is the lovely couple Ellery Lloyd. So it's very exciting.
Which leaves me with the final task of saying goodbye to everybody. So it's goodbye from Sharon.
Bye.
And it's goodbye from Lauren.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. Bye-bye.
Bye.